des droits de douane d'un niveau comme celui qui a été annoncé par l'administration américaine, c'est-à-dire de 30%, aurait des conséquences absolument dramatiques sur l'ensemble des chaînes de valeur.
Tariffs at the level announced by the U.S. administration, that is 30%, would have absolutely dramatic consequences for the entire value chain, which is highly integrated. Some industries have warned us of a mortal risk. I use a term that was used. If 30% customs duties were to be applied. Faced with all this, Europe's position must be one of negotiation, but also one of firmness. We have a deadline of August 1st, since this is the deadline the negotiators have set themselves for reaching an agreement. If an agreement has not been reached by August 1st, the first series of countermeasures will have to be taken, and in particular the 21 billion euros of countermeasures that can be triggered almost immediately by the European Union. That anti-coercion tool I mentioned has a slightly longer time horizon.
L'outil anti-coercition que j'évoquais a un horizon temporel un petit peu plus long.
On July 22, 2025, French Finance Minister Marc Ferracci stated that U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs could severely harm certain French industries. Join Economy Roast for an in-depth analysis in the next 15 minutes. The western part of Paris, France, is known as the cosmetics valley of the country. Cosmetics are exported to numerous markets, with 25% destined for the U.S. According to FEBEA, the association representing the French cosmetics industry, exports to the U.S. reached nearly €3 billion in 2024, accounting for about 12% of total export value. Perfumes make up more than half of this, with 1 out of every 5 bottles sold abroad purchased by U.S. consumers.
For French cosmetics brands, exports are an essential outlet. It's not always easy to imagine, but some French brands are basically only sold outside France. That needs to be understood. The image that French cosmetics brands have internationally is established, and it represents, for us, a very, very strong opportunity. Given that the United States is the #1 market internationally for cosmetics, the tariffs, deprives us of an enormous client base.
With higher prices, U.S. consumers may shift to domestic products or brands from countries unaffected by tariffs, leading to a decline in French cosmetic sales.
The two consequences might be to better negotiate with the distributors upstream the proportion of the increased cost, tariff, but also to pass on to the consumer the cost of the increase. We'll have to see to what extent an American customer will go along with that price rise for imported products.
The 30% tariff that Trump has threatened to impose on European goods starting August 1st, if implemented, would be a turning point for Europe, wiping out all transatlantic trade and forcing Europe to rethink its export-driven economic model. Even if a trade agreement is reached, tariffs could still range from 15 to 20%. This creates uncertainty, particularly impacting the French cosmetics industry, as higher prices in the U.S. reduce competitiveness and consumer demand.
30% is bad news for the cosmetics industry. Firstly, because the American market is our first export market. 12% of exports go to the United States, and also because at 30%, we'll start to see an impact on companies. One study done by consultants, Asterisk, estimated that a 30% tariff would translate, in France, into 12,000 job losses.
In response to the situation, the French cosmetics industry is exploring new strategies, such as exporting through a U.S.-based company to mitigate the impact of tariffs, or more broadly, seeking alternative markets. Brazil and India are currently seen as highly promising markets. The U.S. market would also be severely impacted if the tariffs are implemented. Once a week, executives at D'Addario & Company, a manufacturer of guitar strings and drumsticks for top musicians worldwide, gather at the company's headquarters, about 40 miles east of New York, to strategize on navigating the trade war between the U.S. and other countries. Previously, Trump's trade disruptions were so intense that they required daily meetings. However, having adapted to constantly changing regulations, they've scaled back to weekly meetings to plan how to protect their business and seize potential opportunities. Such strategic meetings are taking place across American corporations, as Trump's tariffs create challenges and rising costs in global supply chains built up over decades. For D'Addario, a family-owned business operating for over half a century, this means reviewing every aspect of the company to assess risks, developing strategies such as establishing their own free trade zones and rerouting shipments to avoid tariffs.
What did we do in the onset of the tariff war? Lots of things. First, we filed an application for a foreign trade zone that we could designate for portions of our facilities, which would allow us to import either finished goods or parts for finished goods and avoid tariffs, presumably if you re-exported that product to our export customers. And that's very important because our business is roughly 50-50 U.S. and international in terms of volume.
D'Addario is the world's largest manufacturer of music accessories, with annual sales of $235 million and 6 factories in the U.S. 5 of those factories are located in this Long Island suburb, including one that produces 750,000 instrument strings daily for a wide range of instruments, from bass guitars and banjos to violas and mandolins. Although the company manufactures nearly all its products in the U.S., its supply chain and distribution network span globally. They export nearly 45% of their production to 120 countries, with Japan being their largest foreign market. However, the cost of materials for the company's production will skyrocket starting August 1st if Trump follows through on his promise to impose a new range of tariffs, including 25% on Japanese goods.
So it's just expanded in terms of acquisition channels. Yeah, so we're researching that. But any instrument you can think of, we can make a string for acquisitions. When we acquired like this.
The company also plans to conduct some assembly work at factories in China. However, this cannot be implemented immediately. D'Addario estimates it could take over a year to obtain the necessary approvals and build the facility, which would need to be secured with fencing and special surveillance equipment.
Given that our international business is so robust, we've been working with our Chinese suppliers to actually drop ship finished goods on our behalf to our customers all over the world. We can literally, if we need to, divert shipments that are on their way to the States to other markets where we have our own entities. So literally stuff that's on the water intended to go to the U.S., we can divert, if we needed to different parts of the world to avoid the tariffs. We've lowered the amount of products that we've imported from China by onshoring a lot of the capabilities, including injection molding. However, to us, really one of the bigger risks for us is the business that we export into China. And there's really 2 parts to that. One, we're the world's largest supplier of musical instrument strings as original equipment for new instruments. So for instance, guitar manufacturers in China, we regularly supply strings made here in New York for those factories because we can make a high quality, low cost string. So that's going to be one impact, is the tariffs on OEM strings going into China. The other impact, of course, is all the finished goods that we go to market with going into China are suddenly going to be somewhat unaffordable. And we're really concerned about that. We have a team of people on the ground there that were responsible for our sales strategies, marketing strategies, and our distribution strategies in China. They're really worried, of course, about what's going to happen on August 1st, because if our products are not affordable there, it's going to, of course, lower our market share, and it'll make it really difficult for us to compete with Chinese-based brands.
The company's tariff bill is projected to reach $2.2 million by the end of this year, compared to just $700,000 last year. Part of this is the new cost of importing cane from the company's plantations in France and Argentina, used to produce woodwind reeds. tariffs on cane have risen to 10% and are expected to increase further.
We are running an experiment with our 3PL in China where we, instead of shipping a finished packaged set of strings, we would actually export bulk strings and actually do the packaging assembly in China. So, of course, what that means is that the tariffs on the lower cost bulk string would help us reduce that import costs. And by having them assemble the products in China, then we have finished goods that are somewhat affordable, maybe not as affordable as they were before tariffs, but at least it'll help us close the gap in terms of price differences between local brands in China and what we produce. We estimate that we've incurred anywhere between $500,000 to $750,000 in additional costs that we didn't plan for already this year. And of course, if you annualize that, it's going to be in the ballpark of between $1.5 and $2 million of additional costs that we never considered going into this year. So we're not alone. I'm sure other businesses are dealing with that, but it did force us to react quickly in terms of price changes. In fact, we implemented a price change in early May. And if necessary, we may need to consider additional price increases if tariffs continue to escalate. It creates a disruption in the market. We've seen people reluctant to spend. There's a lack of confidence. So that's unnerving. But at the end of the day, I think what we have to concentrate on is things that we can control. And things like onshoring, things like creating a foreign trade zone. Those are the things we can control, and we'll continue to do those things so that we can preserve, our company's, presence and strength in the market.
I got to tell you, it's really a duopoly of the market. Our biggest competitor is a French company called Vantage. For those plantations, we're investing in an AI tool that will allow us to study.
How so?
Because, we're very similar.
If you truly want to transform this country back into a manufacturing power, it takes a generation to do that. And that takes investments in education, in literally equipment and technology, but that just doesn't happen within a few years of implementing tariffs. It's a long play, and you have to be prepared for that.
Over the past few months, the U.S. has imposed a minimum 10% tariff on most imported goods, with higher tariffs on steel, aluminum, automobiles, and auto parts. The Budget Lab at Yale University states that the trade war has so far raised the effective U.S. tariff rate to around 20%, a level not seen since the 1930s.